This talk is titled Intelligence Offloading for Developmental Neurosimulation. So we start by talking about intelligence offloading, and we turn to the work of Andy Clark and his example of the bluefin dolphin, where bluefin dolphins use vortices in the environment to improve their swimming capacity. Specifically, it augments the feedback loop between sensory motor control and its environment. So how does this get selected for in evolution, and how does this get expressed in development? We can also turn to Risco and Gilbert, who give a definition of cognitive offloading, which is the use of physical action to alter the information processing requirements of a task so as to reduce cognitive demand. We can take parts of that definition to define embodiment in action, development plus externalization, and trade-offs in response to developmental constraints. We can also look at this in terms of cybernetics and what they call animats, and we can take an agent-based perspective on this. So we can look at offloading as the agent phenotype that's developing, and we give the agent a model of innateness. And that agent, as it develops, interacts with its environment, and specifically affordances. There's a feedback from the environment and affordances back to the agent phenotype, and it informs its development. So we can see a developing agent here. We can also take insights from cybernetics and connectionism and look at embodied models of neural circuits. So we can take neural circuits, put them in an embodied agent, and achieve similar things to what we were showing in the last slide. Then there are these developmental trade-offs. So developmental trade-offs allow an agent to emphasize different aspects of their development at the cost of other things in their development. So depending on the inputs of an agent, depending on the environment it finds itself in, it has to make these trade-offs. So the trade-offs of the inputs include the energetic budget, the rate of brain growth, and the rate of information acquisition. And this can result in different types of perceptual and internal model attributes. And what's interesting about direct perception and affordances is it includes the body, which can function like a statistical prior and information prefilter. So this approach is explicitly emphasizes the agent's body. We can also turn to critical periods to understand the timing and development of these things. So these trade-offs exist not just uniformly across development, but during critical periods where you have points in development that define sort of the growth of this morphology and some of these developmental shifts that inform later developmental learning. As developing agents explore their world, energy can be put into expanding neuronal tissue or finding ways of encoding information in the environment through affordances. So your agent here, your agent's brain is a certain size, and it grows through development, and the size of the brain may depend on the innateness of the organism, or it might depend on its environment and its interactions. Larger brained agents are going to result from richer environments. But agents can furthermore put things out into the environment and conserve some of that space. So we'll take a couple of examples from the literature to show how people are kind of approaching this. So the first example is from developmental psychology, the developmental origins of cognitive offloading. And we find that in human children, there is a gradual shift with age towards externalization in the form of physical manipulation or manual rotation of artifacts for memory and conceptual learning. The second example is from agents, which is the paper Cognitive Offloading does not prevent, but rather promotes cognitive development. And what they do is they train a robot on a T-maze, and they use a genetic algorithm to sort of bootstrap cognition. And this is done by explicitly leaning on offloading. This third paper is about the size of the brain. And so we know from the Tree of Life that different organisms have different sized brains. And there are rules that you can derive from the scaling of the body size to the brain size. In this paper, smaller brain agents must increase neural complexity to enhance their ability to engage in social complexity. Eusociality, in turn, can provide a boost to neural entropy and the degrees of freedom of neural activity using smaller brains. The fourth citation is from Large Brain Mammals Live Longer, which is an evolutionary study which says that natural selection favoring large brains and longer developmental periods should have favored their evolution only if they provide counterbalancing advantages. So the large brain is used as a buffer that allows for environmental variation to be overcome and behavioral complexity to proceed. And so we also can draw more generally from developmental systems theory, which stresses this idea of contingencies and interactions between the environment and the biology. And this is something that we want to maybe return to a little bit later on. So we can actually derive some rules, and we can draw from the laws of heterochrony in biology to sort of build a model of this. So we can look at like how brain growth accelerates and decelerates over developmental time. We can get a parameter K. We can map K to some sort of measure of offloading potential, and we can derive a law there. And then we can show offloading potential in K as a function, and then how it relates to acquisition. Next thing we can look at, though, we can put this in a more behavioral context and look at spatial cognition. And in spatial cognition, we can look at something we call viewpoint networks, and even looking at things like proximal development or social behavior in space. So the example I'm going to give you here is looking at the evolution of mental rotation. This is the development of brains and their interface with the environment. Now, this brain is de novo in terms of its environmental properties, and this is supposed to be an exoplanet. And the agent is supposed to make sense of shapes and apparent motion at different orientations. So how do we do this? Well, in one way is we can take these agents and put them in an environment where they view things from different perspectives. So these are our viewpoint networks. They're isometric structures, and it allows the agents to view environmental geometry from multiple perspectives. So you can train agents on mental rotation, and agents can share their information between one another. You can also train them on more complex topologies, so they can take a slice of a complex geometry, and they have to all create sort of a uniform or mean mental representation. And so this, again, is these agents evolving internal models, offloading to different points on this landscape, and then deriving a common representation. The innate component may dictate a degree of spatial rotation and navigation skill. Finally, we can turn to the developmental learning of celestial navigation, an experiment where we can put agents on the ground and make them look at a star field that moves systematically and learn things from those positions. We have a Medium post on this. It was a prior presentation at a prior conference, and we have a preprint available to download. Thank you for your attention.